Hello, my name is Hamlet Dobbins, and this is Memphis Material, an oral history project chronicling the stories of the visual arts in Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis Material is a podcast celebrating the personal histories, the intimate stories, and the studio practices of some of the people who help shape the creative landscape of our city. These unedited interviews are all recorded at the Memphis Listening Lab, an archival gem located in the majestic Crosstown Concourse in beautiful Midtown Memphis. Now, the website for Memphis Material and all of the legwork to bring you this podcast in its podcast form was done by the amazing Brian Dixon. And I am so thankful for his help and to him for his years and years of being my go-to person for all things design, all things web. We would not be able to do this. I would not be able to do this without Brian. Now, today's interview is the second of two interviews that I did with Fredric Koeppel. Now, this interview was done on April 12th, 2024. And again, we don't have sponsors, but if we did, today's sponsor would be Fredric. Fredric was sort of the source of great inspiration for me. Fredric, I think at some point, wrote a review of Nancy Cheers's paintings where he talked about how he had come to know Nancy's paintings over the decades, how Fredric had known Nancy and her work for so long, and one of the things that he loved about writing was being able to talk about the kinds of things that she made 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and how it changed. And one of the pleasures of being in a community like this one, but also being an artist and being a person who looks at art and thinks about art and people for a long time, is watching them change and watching them do different things and charting that growth. And so I am very thankful for Fredric. So this interview, again, the second of two interviews recorded with Fredric Koeppel. This one was recorded on April 12th, 2024. Enjoy the interview. Click. Push the button. All right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you hear yourself okay?
Yes.
Great. All right. Cool. All right. So I've listened to yours twice, actually. Mostly because I was like, wait, what did he say about that again? And so you were in China for a month?
Yes.
Now, how often would they do this? They do this once a year? They'd send you off to a different country?
This was for Memphis in May.
Right.
And every year they would announce the country, and the newspaper would have a little competition for a reporter and a photographer to go to that country.
Okay.
And so, and they would stay a month, and then come back and do some stories and stuff. So they announced that the country for 1987 was going to be People's Republic of China.
Right.
I thought, wow, that sounds so fascinating. So I did up a proposal and the kind of stories I wanted to do and everything, and submitted it, and I was selected to go. And this incurred some resentment in the newsroom because I'd only been at the paper for 6 months.
Yeah, because you just showed up.
Yeah, I just it was like, who the hell is this guy, And there was already there like in Metro and the city desk and everything, and all these old grizzled veteran reporters and everything. Like, who is this guy? So we went to China for a month. This was in March, and in some parts of China in March it is really, really cold.
Right.
Flew from San Francisco to Hong Kong, which is about 22 hours, on Singapore Air. It's a great airline. Took the train to Shanghai. Then we went to Wuhan, which is now famous, unfortunately.
Sure.
Xi'an, where the standing warriors are. Then to Beijing. And then we were supposed to go way out to the west like to the Gobi Desert.
Oh, yeah.
And where it's like a lot it's a lot very Islamic and everything. And in Beijing, we were told that we could not go there.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So instead, we went to Mongolia.
Whoa.
And so it was an 8-hour train ride from Beijing to Hohhot,
Okay.
which is the capital, and then another 3 hours by car up to a place called Shulimulin, which is nothing except an abandoned Tibetan Buddhist monastery that was now used as a hostel. And we stayed there for a couple of nights. Slept in a yurt and all this stuff. I mean, I could write a book. I could just write a book about those. Then back to Beijing, and then way back down to Guangzhou,
Okay.
which used to be Canton, and then to Hong Kong. And we got back, and it was when we got back after that, in April, that I became the art writer. That sort of thing, like, go do this. So I came back, and it had been typical for the reporters who went on these trips, to do like a big Sunday feature, like
Right.
every Sunday.
Right.
I came back and wrote a story every day.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. Now, when you were doing this trip, was it aimed at sort of taking everything in? Was it aimed at food? Was it aimed at like?
No, it was everything, because I wasn't a restaurant reviewer yet,
Right.
so there was not that sort of mindset. And what was great was that there were only two of us, right? Me and a photographer, a guy named Larry Coyne. So we did not have a national tour guide from Beijing, from the Ministry of Tourism. We picked up a local guide in every city. And so I remember when we went to Xi'an, we were picked up by this lovely young woman, and we got in the car. And that was the other thing. In every place we went, we had a car and driver. So she got in the car. We got in the car at the airport, and she said, "Okay, I have all these things planned. We're going to a temple. We're going to silk factory. Da 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 da." And we said, "We don't want to do anything of those things. We want to go to a barber shop and get a haircut.
Okay.
We want to go home with you and see where you live and meet your parents." Yeah, we want to do the Standing Warriors. Yeah, of course, we can't get out of there. It was that way in every city except Beijing.
Okay.
Because once we got to Beijing, it was like, okay, we are officially under the aegis of the Ministry of Tourism here. So I had a contact at Memphis, a doctor who had done eye work in China, and he gave me the name of a young journalist in Beijing who worked for a magazine called China Today. So we had a meeting at the Ministry of Tourism, and we said all these things we wanted to do. We had a list, and they just crossed everything out. They said, "You cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this, you cannot do this." We said, "God, what are we going to do?" Because we wanted to go to the National Ballet Studio and see a rehearsal. We wanted to go to a television studio, all this stuff. No. So I called this guy, and I said, "Listen, my name's Fredric Koeppel. I'm a journalist. I'm from Memphis. I'm a photographer. And Jerry Freeman in Memphis gave me your name. He said, I'm coming to get you." So he came and got us, and he took us to their offices, and he got everybody in a meeting. He said, "These are my friends from Memphis, and they want to do this and this and this and this and this." And the dance writer said, "Okay, I'll get you into ballet." And the media writer said, "Yeah, I'll get you into a TV studio." So we got to do all this stuff that the Ministry of Tourism said that we couldn't do. So
Now, did you notice when you were there visiting those places, did you figure out why the Ministry of Tourism didn't want you to go there, or was it just one of those things where they were just being really strict and sort of a pain in the ass?
I think it was really the latter. I think they were being. I mean, they didn't let us go way out in the west because there was some sort of unrest going on, you know. But in Beijing, I think they were just being hard nosed. You know, they just didn't want us to do stuff like that.
Wow. No, I mean, part of me thinks, okay, it must have been really tricky, really difficult to say to everybody in your life, okay, I'm going to head out for a month. And then another part of me thinks, oh, that must have been really great to just head off and do this for a month.
Well, both, of course. I mean, I left my wife behind and 2 kids for a month, so they had to, make do without me. Which I'm sure was fine anyway, whatever. But it was. I mean, I've been a lot of places. China was the strangest and most exotic place I'd ever been. And we would have young people come up to us, like we were just standing in a street corner in Beijing. And, crowds of people going back and forth and everything. And this young man came up. And he said, "You are American?" And we said, "Yeah." And he said, "There is a book I would like to read that I have never been able to find a copy of. And maybe you could get a copy of this book in America and send it to me." And I said, "What is the book?" He said, the book is called 1984, and it is by Mr. George Orwell. And I said, there are 2 problems. First of all, I can't send you that book because the government opened all mail from out of the country, And I said, they would find you with that book that was coming to you, and that book is banned in China. So I'm so sorry that I can't do that. I wish I could. And teenagers would just come up to us and say, "Send us newspapers. Just send us newspapers."
Because that must have been, I mean, when was it that they opened for tourism?
I don't know exactly.
Because I feel like my grandparents, I think, did that. And I feel like it might have been Carter. So it might have been like maybe mid 70s. I could be totally wrong about this, but I think that was around the time that my grandparents also went, as soon as it was kind of open.
Well, there's the whole Nixon in China thing.
Right.
When he was president, and that was such a big deal and everything.
Right. That's interesting. Now, did you get a chance to do other trips like this?
Yes. 1990, the country was France.
Oh, my Lord.
And it was like the whole editorial thing. It was just like, well, who the hell else are we going to send if we don't send Fredric? So I got to go to France, and my photographer was Dave Darnell. And this time we had our own car. We spent a week in Paris, and then, we picked up our car. We went to Champagne. We went down to Dijon, and then through Burgundy, and all the way down to the south to Provence, and across to Toulouse and Carcassonne, to Bordeaux, and up to, through Brittany and Normandy, and back to Loire Valley, and back to Paris.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that, obviously, when you came back from that one, you probably also wrote one a day.
One a day, every day.
Yeah. Man, that's a killer perk. This thing.
It was incredible.
Because you were talking last time about like writing the review while the editor's over your shoulder, and then we all kind of like envision the difficulties and the madcap antics that happen at a newspaper that we sort of get fed from pop culture. But I love this idea of being able to go to these countries for a whole month. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And then, so you were saying that you had traveled, but you'd never been anywhere as exotic as China. Were there other places that you had traveled earlier in your life that were kind of important in terms of?
No, I was pretty much travelless.
Okay.
Before that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you got to go to France. Any place else that was super awesome
while
we're here?
At the same time, I was also, the Wonder series was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That actually came up the other day.
Okay, so when they did the Catherine the Great, well, I went to Leningrad because it was all about art and culture and food and stuff. It was still Leningrad. It wasn't St. Petersburg yet. It had been St. Petersburg, and they changed it to Leningrad. It was still there, and then they went back. That was pretty exotic and wonderful.
Because when was that?
That was 1990.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 1990, I went to France for Memphis in May, and I went to Russia for that was great. And then a couple years later, I went to Rome because that was the year they did two. They did Napoleon and the Etruscan exhibition, and somebody else went to France for the Napoleon thing. And I went to Rome with Mike McMullen as the photographer, and for the Etruscan thing. And we spent a lot of time at the Vatican. But the thing is, in Italy, museums close at noon, and so we had like the rest of the day, just to do stuff. And it was wonderful to go to the ruins and go to old churches, and I took a taxi out to the Old English Cemetery to see Keats's grave and shed a tear, and we ate fantastically. And there's a little restaurant we found right not far from the Vatican, not far from St. Peter's Square. It was called La Bruzzese, and it was the food of Abruzzo, over on the coast. And so we went to lunch there every day, and it got to the point where the owner, this middle-aged woman, she'd recognize us every day, and we'd go in, and she'd just bring all this food and carafes of wine and stuff, and she'd bring her children out and introduce them and everything. I mean, it was wonderful. It was just wonderful. And I probably shouldn't say this, but I've never been on a trip where I was so buzzed all the time.
Not even France.
Not even France.
Because I would think that anyway. Okay, so not even France. So you're doing all this writing, and so you're there, and at this point you're full time, obviously.
Oh yeah.
You're writing there. Yeah. Now, when was it that you started writing about art?
That was excuse me. That was in 1987.
Okay.
When I came back from China.
Okay.
And John Sparks handed me this invitation.
Right.
To the graduating student show at Rhodes College, and he said, you're the new art reviewer.
Now, had you been going to see art?
I liked art.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't like art? What are you, communist? Yeah. But you wouldn't necessarily go in the way that I think of you now as going to just about everything.
Well, first of all, now I don't go to anything. I mean, we just I wrote my last art review.
I know. But I still see you at openings.
2017, canceled my subscription to the Commercial Appeal, and we're really bad about it. We're really bad about it. We should go out more and be more involved in everything, but it's like I don't keep up a lot with the new restaurants and things.
Mm. Well, you're cooking so much stuff at home.
Well, I cook at home every night.
Pretty great.
But I will say the best restaurant to open Memphis in many years is the Lobbyist.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've not been there. What do you get there that's good? I mean, everything.
Everything.
But what do you get there that where you were like,
it's just indescribably good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where is it?
It's in the lobby of the old Chiska Hotel next to Catherine and Mary's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. All right. I'll add it to the queue. Is it kind of like is it sort of a expensive place?
I'd say moderately expensive.
Okay. Yeah. So not super. Okay.
So anyway. Once I started being the art reviewer, of course, I went to everything. I tried to review. I always told artists, don't hang your art in coffee shops. The lighting sucks. The walls are the wrong color. Nobody's there to watch your stuff. Don't hang your art in coffee shops and beauty salons and all that. But I tried to go to those places because the kids who were showing their art there needed to have a critical voice, needed to have somebody talking about them.
Now, thinking about that critical voice, for me, one of the things we try to do at the U of M is try to encourage students to write and to talk about writing and the importance of writing in a community. And so at that time, you were the only one. Because there wasn't because when did the press center close? Was that in the 80s?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the Flyer wasn't anywhere near there now. And so you were were you kind of the only person writing about art in Memphis?
Pretty much. I'd say so. The Flyer started actually, I guess, in the late '80s, maybe.
Okay.
And they had a series. They had a series of people who were writing about art and reviewing exhibitions.
Now, what was something? Full disclosure, you've written about me and you've written about a lot of shows that I've done. And one of the things I love about you is when you come to see a show, you just stay there. Obviously, when you write about art, it's important to look at it and to be there. But you are a particularly observant writer. Is it kind of one of those things where, like last time you were saying you would write the review of the movie as you were driving to the commercial appeal?
Yeah, right.
Is it one of those things that, like, as you're in the space, I know you're also taking notes, but is it one of those things that you're beginning to compose, you're beginning to think about while you're there in the space?
Yeah, right, absolutely.
Okay.
If you spend a lot of time in the space, that gives you a chance to start framing what you think about and how you want to express what you think about the work.
And one thing also I remember about your writing that's so good is that you'll always, you'll write about it, and there's also like a real deep reading of it and a real patient reading of it. But then also you'll make these connections to other artists or language or literature that the maker had never really thought about, And so, like, you're obviously bringing a lot of your really great deep knowledge of literature to that, and for me that's such a great thing. Now, when you first started writing, what were the logistics of it? What was it, the learning curve like in terms of starting to write about art? Because I know you wrote about wine and you wrote about food, but obviously writing about art is a little different.
Oh, sure. Well, it was. Obviously, once I started, it was a learning experience that did require sort of a big curve of figuring out how to do this. It was the same way with reviewing restaurants. How do you really review a restaurant, and what do you say and how much can you say about the food and the service and the ambiance and how it all works together? And it's the same thing for the work of art. Not exactly the same thing. But you're in there. You're in a gallery, and here's the work on the wall or hanging up or whatever. And you have to think, what's going on? What's the material here, and how is the material being used? And is there? Even in the sense of abstraction, is there a sort of an arc? Is there a kind of a narrative? Not necessarily in the sense of a story, but a narrative to the process itself of making the work of art, And For one thing, I never minded doing what many critics think is something very dangerous to do, and that is try to get to the intention. Try to see, what's going on in the artist's mind and imagination and eye and hand when they were doing these pieces. Particularly, of course, if they are a set of pieces, something, if it's just all different things, that's a little bit different. But to try to see, okay, there's a relationship between this piece and this piece and this piece, and it's a relationship both of, what would you say? Both of structure and of gesture, of what's on the canvas, but what went into putting that paint on the canvas, and even in representational art, that's very, very important. So for the 30 years that I wrote about art for the commercial appeal, it was very important for me not to separate. When I was teaching literature, there was a textbook that we used in the second semester of freshman English called Sound and Sense. And it was a poetry textbook with, explanations, And it was always interesting to me that they made the separation. There's sound and there's sense. But there's really no separation between sound and sense, just as there's no separation between material and technique. And the third element, the material, the technique, and the imagination that's going into whatever what did I say before? The narrative arc is of what's happening on the canvas or the panel or the piece or whatever, yeah. So I don't remember exactly what the question was, but...
yeah, that was so good. Well, originally I had asked about the learning curve for you as a maker, or for you as the reviewer.
Right. Okay. So to start going to, the Brooks and the Dixon and looking at their big shows and everything, and then going to, David Lux didn't even have his own gallery then. It was Alice Bingham and Lisa Kurtz still working together, and then gradually Lisa Kurtz, Kathy Albers, Belle Ross, and then these, the little places, martial arts came along, and, material came along, Plan B, or just, somebody's garage or whatever. But the whole thing is, essentially, none of those places are different. Everyone is an echo chamber for a group of pieces. And it doesn't matter if it's, it matters in different ways, but in terms of what the critic's doing, it doesn't matter where it is. What matters is making that connection between my sensibility, which started developing when I was a child, and my mother and I were sitting on the couch looking at art books together, and all the art history that I took at Memphis State under William Quisenberry, and then, looking at art here and there and that sort of thing, and then all of a sudden, I'm evaluating, and it's my responsibility to be fair, to be hyper observant, to be sensitive, to open my imagination and even my heart as much as possible to what I'm looking at, you see. And the whole fairness element is very, very tricky. I mean, reviewing a restaurant, you can say, well, you know, we really like this dish and we like this dish, and this dish didn't work so much. But that's not so difficult because you have this whole range of things. You have a whole menu, and you know you go to the restaurant twice, and so you eat and you always go with somebody, so you eat as many things as possible. So you can say, well, you know, this worked and this worked. This other dish maybe not so much, and this could be improved. But you know, overall 2 stars, whatever. But you go to an art show, especially a local art show by a local artist who's put everything into creating this art. And, you know, I mean, truly, I'll say, you know, I've walked into galleries and stuff and, you know, my heart sunk, you know, because you just look and you think, you know, this shouldn't be here. This shouldn't be up. This is just not ready. And sometimes that even happened with artists, you know, that were, you know, sort of well known or whatever, or popular or whatever. So you have to be able to say, maybe this doesn't work, and maybe that doesn't work. Maybe this didn't work. I like, you know, the brush strokes, you know, I mean, whatever. But, I mean, the important thing is, you know, not to crush somebody, you know, not to make them say, well, okay, that's it.
Right.
You know, throwing away the brushes, throwing away the paints.
Right. I love that thing that you said, and it totally did not occur to me, the thing that you said about when you come to the artwork, you know, you as the writer are bringing everything that you had experienced before. Like, that was sort of in my head. I knew about that, especially because you bring so many different aspects to the writing. But that thing that you said about your own vulnerability or opening your own heart to be able to talk about these things, was that something that you kind of grew into, or was that something that was there from the very beginning?
No, I will confess that that's always been part of my personality and character. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm.
And then in thinking about that, I mean, I think, you know, one of the dangers of that, of course, is that, I mean, while it pays off in terms of the reader being able to it maybe enter the review a little bit more, or come to know you as a writer, as a person through your reviews, has it ever worked in the opposite direction, where you were like, oh, you know, like a week later you were like, shit, you know, that was too much. I revealed too much of myself in that.
Yeah, occasionally that did happen. Not so much with restaurants, but with art and with books. Certainly that happened. This is slightly peripheral, but when Leslie and I first lived together, our first apartment in the Greenstone thing, I don't even know how it started, but every Sunday morning I would read out loud a short story by Henry James. And those take a long time, because I was reading the big ones, like the Beast in the Jungle and the Altar of the Dead and the Lesson of the Masters, and we would just end in tears, you know, because, you know, people don't think of Henry James as a writer who can bring you to tears, but he gets so deep into the process of art and the imagination and the vulnerability of the artist and the impossibility of it all, you know. And then we just, whoa, boo-hoo. And so I wrote something about that in the newspaper, you know, and it ran on a Sunday, and I got to work the next morning, and there was a message, and I picked up my phone, and somebody said, "You fag." And I thought, well, okay, I took the risk, whatever.
And then I wonder too. I mean, when you were talking about writing and going in and seeing something, and then seeing something where your heart sinks, is there kind of there's got to be a kind of governor on you where you're like, oh yeah, this one's not. I'm gonna go across the street and see another show.
Yeah. You have to do that because, again, going off on a slant, there were restaurants I went to, and you just say, oh no, this is horrible. This just doesn't stand a chance. And I'd go back to the newspaper and say, we can't do that. We can't do that. And so, yeah, I would go back to, my editor and say, we're going to wait for this artist's next exhibition and see what happens.
And then I would imagine, so thinking about that, I have a 3-month rule where I don't go to a restaurant until they've been open for 3 months.
Yeah,
do you have a similar rule?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was part of our official policy.
Okay.
The commercial bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Okay. Huh. And so one of the things I've mentioned several times in this interview process when I've done interviews with other people, I started interviewing younger people too. And one of the things I mentioned is how in one of your reviews, I think it might have been of one of Nancy Cheers' shows, you talked about how you had written about Nancy's work several times, over the decades.
Yes.
And one of the things I mention every once in a while to people is how I'm hoping that this project will be a long one and it'll be ongoing. And so one of the things that I'm interested in is interviewing people now and then interviewing them, 10 years from now or whatever. And so, and for me, one of the things I wanted to be sure to talk about with you is that kind of, not just to talk about, but also you and I have talked about this at openings and stuff. It's a thing that I cite a lot in terms of thinking about why I enjoy being a part of this community, is that there are these people who, for me, as an artist who is beginning, who is in his 50s, like I see people like Beth Edwards and Pinckney Herbert and Vita Reed at 90 making these kick-ass paintings, and to me making the best paintings of their life. And so like for me that's a thing that's really inspiring and super exciting. But I'm curious, like, what are some things that you've gleaned in terms of thinking about writing for as long as you have in this community?
Well, you've hit on one of the advantages of having written about art in Memphis for 30 years, because that gave me the opportunity to write about people multiple times and to basically listen in or watch their careers and see how they develop and see what goes along and be able to express, not only the critical part of it, but actually the gratitude, for being able to be a part of, the growth of this this whole thing. And when I started, it was sort of tentative, But then as the years go by, and I wrote about you multiple times, and Nancy, Tad, oh God, who else? I guess Pinckney, and Vita, of course. But so many others. And it was just Terry Jones. I loved writing about Terry's work, and to watch it from the beginning. The downtown, the Casa Library downtown, they had a little gallery in the ground floor of looking out to that fountain, And I had this little postcard. I went down there, and the show was basically a bunch of fabricated pennies thrown on the floor. And I just thought, what the fuck is this, you know? And it was the first work I'd ever seen by Terry, you know? And I thought, and then and I had to think, okay, now wait a minute, back up. Give it a chance to do what the artist wants it to do. You know, let's not have a sort of, you know, bourgeois knee-jerk reaction or anything. You know, is that art? And then, of course, then I got to know her and see more and more of her work. And she had, you know, that retrospective at AMUM, and it was just, you know, and it was just glorious to watch her and to see her work and everything. In fact, I was thinking on the way up here, the first 3 feature stories that I did on artists in Memphis, you know, like Sunday fanfare stories, were on Jay Edkin, Liz Mask, and Jeannie Umbright. And Jeannie and Jay, of course, are still here, still working. Liz is not, of course. I mean, she went on to, you know, she lives up in the Cumberland Plateau and raises
those ridgebacks,
Rhodesian ridgebacks. Yeah. So,
you know, it's so interesting. When I do these interviews, I never think like how I might edit it later. But Terry talked about that Cosset show, and so like part of my brain was like,
oh really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
so
great.
I'll get, I'll have that little moment, and then I'll layer in Fredric. But I'm totally not going to do that. But because I think that was when I first met Terry,
Okay.
And it was something that she had mentioned. And you know, it's funny you were talking about that kind of knee-jerk reaction. Like I've told Terry this several times, and she knows it because she was standing there with me. But once when she had this show at David's, you know, I came in to see it early, and she just happened to be there, you know, finishing up some stuff, and we were standing there, and this woman opens the door and then comes in and goes, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know y'all didn't have a show. And she turned around and she left. And it was like this, you know, because it was so spare, you know. I think
right.
maybe she had some of those vellum,
Yeah.
those frosted vellum
Yeah.
drawings with graphite on the wall, and like even lit, you know, they were
Yeah.
kind of suppressed. But yeah, I mean that thing, and for me too, like you were talking about, one of the questions I was gonna ask was, you know, were there any artists that you, like earlier when you said you came in and you were like, okay, this is not good, I'll write about it next time. And so I was thinking to myself, well, okay, well, I wonder if there was any artists like that. But I think that thing that you said about Terry's is such a great point, because I mean, that thing that you were saying, that was her first show. Mm-hmm. You know, you had not been acclimated, or your internal metronome had not adjusted to that artist's metronome. Mm-hmm. And so it was a very cold read. And then also this thing about you sort of forcing yourself, or reminding yourself that, you know, you need to be patient, sort of pay attention, and that kind of thing. And for me, that's such a wonderful thing that you mentioned, you know, to say, okay, wait, hang on, and to give yourself that space to think about it, because that's something that I think a lot of times people say, oh, reviewers don't do that. You know, reviewers come in and they give us this sort of knee-jerk response. I think a lot of times in the brains of the reader, I don't think they maybe necessarily always recognize the consideration or the rethinking that reviewers will do in their process. And I love that thing that you said about that show at the Cosset, because it's such a strange space. And I think shortly after that, I think Terry did that piece at the Botanic Garden where they gave her, do you remember this? It was for Arts in the Park. And they gave her, it might have been Overton Park, but they gave her like a budget. In my brain, it was like $300, but she said it was like $1,000 or $1,500, and she spent it all on pennies. And then she just took the pennies and just made a path out of these pennies. And anyway, we were talking about that. That was one of the things that we were talking about. But I mean, it seems perfect in terms of you and Terry's work, because she's so literary as well.
Yes.
You know, I mean, she's
Yes.
thinking about these metaphors and these poems
Yeah.
and these stories and how they come together. Were there other artists in town where you felt like you had a particular affinity in terms of, like you were saying, that person, you know, I kind of came to understand them, or you sort of look forward to their shows?
You know, one thing I discovered about myself, and this applies to any critic really writing about anything, is that the reviewer, the critic, has to allow the artist the freedom of their development, the freedom of their growth and maturity and all of that, because it's easy to review an artist a few times, or a writer or whatever, and you get used to their style and what they're doing and everything, and then they make a change. And I would find myself resistant. I would say, wait, no, they can't do that. What's going on? This is not as good as what came before, because that's what I was invested in. You know, and it would take me, a little bit to be able to absorb the changes and the development that an artist went through. So I mean that goes back to the whole principle of fairness, of course, and objectivity and detachment, and making sure, okay, this is what the artist was doing this time. It's not the same as it was last time. I remember when when Don Estes started putting color in his work, I was like, wait, no, that's not what you do. And then it was like, wait, no, okay, oh, no, that's fine. This is what he's doing now. And God, years ago, Jesus, I'd seen Tim Crowder's work a few times. I loved his work. And then he had a show at Jay's at the old gallery, the old Koeppel gallery, where Beauty Shop is now, and he had done these paintings and all the little quirky stuff in it, but he had put wire cages around all of them, and I had this super bad reaction to it, and I wrote a pretty negative review about it that came out on Christmas Day. And he's good friends with Corey Messler, and the next time I saw Corey, he said, "Tim didn't appreciate the Christmas present," and I was so sorry about that. I was so sorry, and it was my sort of emotional blindness and my unwillingness not to remain invested in what the artist had been doing previously, and not allow myself to see it with the new eyes.
Right.
Because I mean, when artists develop and they go through stylistic changes, I mean, the reviewer really has to develop a new set of eyes to go along with it. So anyway.
That's so funny, because there's a part of me that's always like, oh yeah, let's get gossipy, like who was it,
Oh.
And then, but of course you mentioned Tim, like to me, Tim is such a interesting maker. And one of the things I also really like about Tim is that it kind of feels like hermit's work, like
Yes.
it feels
Yes.
removed in some way, but
Yes.
it's still connected. It's still
Yes.
art. We know what art is,
Yes.
but it almost feels like someone who knew about art at some point and then decided to live in the woods. And I don't think that's just because I see pictures of Tim, like posting pictures of his cats, in this shed where he paints.
Yeah.
But I think like and Tim is also one of those people where I've gone to see shows and I've said, ooh, Lord, no. But he's also one of those people that I maybe one of the first Memphis people that I didn't know personally that I said, okay, you know what, I trust them. Let's see, let's see what this does. Or because I trust them, it makes me do that thing that you were talking about at Terry's, where it makes me say, okay, hang on, Hamlet, You trust Tim, and so let's see what's he doing here, And I think, I mean, for me, that's another thing that I love about being in town. But also, I love this thing that you said about how you came to see that review differently later, and I mean that, of course. When we see something, some of it is like trying to adjust to it, just like hearing a new album from somebody who, we've listened to their other albums a million billion times, and then all of a sudden they drop something new, and then you're like, oh, this is not good.
Yeah,
and then eventually you sort of, you realize, oh, no, this is the best one. And so I wonder, like, in terms of your writing, is that something that you'll also go back and talk about later in later reviews and say, oh, man, in that last review, I totally missed this. I missed this one. I said this and this and this, and then, but now I realize that it's going here.
Sure,
Was that something that you were also kind of thinking about?
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's just a matter of consistency and longevity. So that you can write about, an exhibition in 2004, at the same time refer back to the artist's work from an exhibition 3 years ago or 9 years ago or whatever, and say to the reader or the newspaper, this is different from what it was, a different kind of work from what the work was 3 or 4 or 10 years ago. But at the same time, you see these threads, you see these streams that move from one exhibition to the other. And so there is, even in the change, there's this sort of consistency, So, I mean, that's the advantage of that long view, to be able to do that.
And then you mentioned this a little bit earlier, and I didn't want to interrupt, but this thing that you were talking about where you really sort of bring, one of the things that you like to think about is the intention, and you were saying a lot of writers don't want to do that, but that's one of the things that we talk so much with our students about. It's like you need to make sure that your object does this thing so that your intentions are there or not there, whatever, but that they're there because one day, you're going to be food for worms. And so you want to make sure that this thing that you make will do that thing. Yeah, I can't give any specific examples, and I'm sorry about that, but I've read critics and reviewers who say, well, trying to guess the artist's intention is presumptuous. Or it's we can never do that because we as critics can't actually get into the artist's head. And I always think, well, of course you can. I mean, it's right there. It's on the wall. It's on the pedestal. It's hanging in the air. Whatever. There is the picture of the artist's intention right there, and in my career, I would get notes and letters from artists saying, you're the only person who's ever said what I'm actually trying to do, and your review made my work come to life. And I'm thankful for that. So, I mean, I think in terms of my career of reviewing art, that's the most important thing that I did. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that we say in class, like someone is standing in front of your piece, what's the thing in the thought bubble above their head? Yeah. And then they come up to you and they say, hey, I love blank, blank, and blank, blank. And then I want you to be like, oh, man, you get it. And so to be thinking about that, and I think for sure one of the things that I really, earlier when I was talking about how long you're in the galleries, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that's so important and it's so difficult to do in these big museums is to pace yourself and to have time and to say, here's my time here. And that was kind of one of the things I really loved about being at Rhodes was that people would tend to stay a little bit longer because it's a huge pain in the ass to find the building, and then you have to find parking, and then you have to get in there. And so there was something about that kind of, not endurance, but those kinds of obstacles that made me, as a curator, try and provide people with something that they would have to chew on a little bit longer. And so, I mean, I'm not totally sure where I was going with that, but one of the other questions that I had in terms of thinking about you, and you mentioned Terry's show at AMOM, if I remember right, that was when Leslie was there at AMOM.
Yeah, right.
And so when was it that you two started to be together?
Leslie came to Memphis in May or June of 1990.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
You know, she'd been in New York and everything.
Right.
She came down. We met. The galleries out east used to have, during the summer, once a month they'd have something called, what did they call it? Introductions. And buses and vans would take people all to the different galleries and everything, and all the galleries would be open, you know, on the same night. And somebody had brought her to Lisa Kurt's gallery. No. Kathy Albers. And I came in, and I knew she was in town because Donald Labadie had done a big feature article about her. So this person introduced us, and I'm sorry to say, and I will also say that Leslie gets a great deal of delight in telling the story. I was very rude to her because I was coming to the breakup end of a relationship I had with this woman for about 2 years, and I was very heartbroken and sad and depressed and discouraged, and I was just not a very nice person that night. And occasionally she reminds me of that, or other people. So you know, that didn't so great. But we encountered each other again, different places, and I went into, there was something that I was going to review, I believe, at AMOM. Of course, it wasn't AMOM then, it was the University Gallery. And so we started talking and everything, and I thought, well, you know, I mean, she's a museum director, and I'm the art critic, and she's really good looking. So I said, well, you know, why don't we have lunch one day? And so we did that, and we started going out, you know, and you know, I always needed somebody to go review restaurants with me, so, you know, so she became, you know, the companion, pretty much, and we hung out together a lot, and pretty much by that spring we were acknowledged to ourselves, and I think, you know, everybody else acknowledged that, you know, we were a couple. And so in 1992, we moved in together, and that was our first apartment in the Greenstone. And then 2 years later, we moved to the big apartment in the Greenstone. Anyway, so you know, I did that, and you know, we traveled together. We went to New York a million times, and L.A. and San Francisco. We went to, you know, France and Italy and all this stuff. And I will tell you right now, and this will be on the record, okay, for the next million years, okay, I fell in love with her because she was the smartest person I had ever known.
Great. I like that. Well, perfect segue into the next question, which is,
okay.
I'm super interested, you know, you were talking about thinking about Terry's work and sort of rethinking Terry's work. And then in my brain, I sort of have this vision of you and Leslie sort of surrounded by the animals, and you guys are eating really great food and drinking really good wine. And you're either talking about art or you're talking about literature. And so I'm curious, what are some things that you feel like the being with Leslie added to your repertoire in terms of looking at and thinking about art?
That's interesting. I would say the first thing is that, I mean, she's a museum person. Mm-hmm. All right. So the first thing it did was make me or help me to look at art through a different sort of vision, and that is of what is supposed to happen in museums and galleries, and how do they hang things, and how do they light things, and what do we think about the quality of things that go into museums and galleries, and what is. I mean, we got to the point. I mean, we could go, like we went to the Venice Biennale twice and the Carnegie several times, and all the New York stuff and everything, and we could stand in front of a piece, and just stand there for several minutes, let us absorb what's going on and everything. And we just look at each other and go, and just nod, say, yeah, okay. Same thing with buildings and architecture, because, she has some background in architectural history and everything. And we just say, look at each other and say, yeah, wow, okay. Or, no. no, that just doesn't do it. So there was a sense in which I would have to say actually that she elevated my conception of style. Yeah.
And also curious in terms of thinking about that, were there examples of artists or other things where you guys just have sort of like a block, like you were saying, you would both sort of say yeah or no? Were there some where you were like yeah and she was like Fredric?
Gosh, gee, that's a great question.
And it would probably be one where like I need Leslie here.
I don't really. Yeah, that's yeah. When you get to her interview, ask her that. She'll remember better than I do. I know we've had probably disagreements, or maybe that's even too strong a word, but just aesthetic kind of disagreements about things. By and large, I think we tend to agree pretty much on things. I can't, right, of course, at the moment think of any examples, but
I know these interviews are like little pop quizzes.
Yeah.
And now, earlier you mentioned some of the different spaces, and it made me think about how you approach things. And if you, like you were saying, wherever the art is, the kind of control that happens inside the space is sort of towards the same end, whether it's a commercial gallery or whether it's an alternative space, But were there some things that you noticed in terms of, because you wrote for so long and you've been seeing things for so long, were there things that you felt like you were privy to by seeing the things at Plan B and the things at Medicine Factory, or the things at, other weird spaces that were kind of hole in the walls that maybe weren't happening necessarily in the galleries, or then that maybe later, I don't know, became powerful and sort of strong in the city? Because one of the things I'm interested in is thinking about, and you mentioned those different spaces, and this was something that Lauren Kennedy mentioned the other day, was this kind of like hungriness in the city for certain things.
But whose hungriness?
Right. The artist and the viewer, hopefully. And so I wonder, are there things that you notice, like in terms of the bird's eye view of all of these different things that you've seen over the years?
Gosh, I mean, it's always been my conception that Memphis is not a great art buying city. I mean, how many legitimate commercial galleries do we have in the city?
Right.
One. Before it was two. Now it's one. Yeah, there are places to see art, and I'm glad that Lauren's opened a place now where I have not been yet, and I'm sorry about that. But a city that does not have more venues where a dealer actually takes charge of an artist's work and career and promotes that artist is not enough of an art buying city. You see, patrons of the arts don't go to coffee houses and garages to buy art. They don't go to, Plan B or, this place and that place where somebody happens to have their art showing. They go to commercial galleries, basically. And if it were possible for this city to develop more of a commercial sense of artists' careers and displaying and buying their art, and even, as I know David does, sending their art out to the country, to other places, and taking their art, like to Miami and things like that. There's no way that we can think of Memphis as a great visual arts city. There are probably a lot of young artists who would say, "Oh, you old bastard, what are you talking about? It's not all about commercialism." Well, yeah, to the extent that the artist is involved in making art. But the artist also has to be involved in selling art and getting art out there. And the whole reason that galleries exist is to take that burden away from the artist so that the artist can make art and also, make a living.
Well, I mean, to me, that seems like it kind of opens a really complicated box, like one of the questions I'll sometimes ask my students is like, okay, so, you've been to Europe, and so you know that art is in every aspect of every city ever. And so, what do we do? How do we make America like that? And so then the students are like, wait, there's not one thing that we can do. It's like a billion different things that we have to do. And so thinking about that kind of complicated answer, what do you think, like if you could say, here's my, prescription for how to make that happen or possibilities of ways of making that happen, what do you think, like, what are some of the factors that we as citizens might be able to address in terms of the city?
The city's attitude in terms of the official city itself is summed up for me in that sculpture that the Martin Luther King sculpture, the steel place.
Sure.
The
George Hunt.
George Hunt.
No, Richard Hunt. Richard Hunt.
Richard Hunt.
Hunt. Sorry.
First it was in one place. Oh, okay. Well, then they move it to a different place. Then it goes in storage for a while. And now it's down in sort of South Arts Main District and in some kind of little park or something. That's not where it should be. You know, this is the city's main monument and tribute to Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated here. It should be back uptown, in the center, you know, but no, you know, let's just sort of brush it out of the way. And so, first of all, we need more art education. I think the closing of the College of Art is a real, or was a real blow. I mean, that just, you know, I mean, obviously the university, you know, has an art department, and Rhodes College has an art department. Does anybody else have a viable art department? I mean, I don't know.
For sure. I mean, in knowing Nick Pena, I know that they just got a new art building there, and they have a new guy who's running that gallery space. But I also know that Christian Brothers just went through a massive economic fallout. Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, because it's one of those things that I also think about a lot. Like, what are the things to do? And one of the people I talked with was Carol DeForest, and she talked about when she was in San Antonio, this massive program that was there in the school system where, I don't know if it was like a Bredesen kind of thing, you know, where like they took all the lottery money and they invested it in these art educators, but there was this big push. Anyway, she talked about the impact of that in her life. And every artist that I've had in here, to a person, except for Jamie Harmon for some reason, talks about the importance of those early experiences in the educational system. And this isn't even like deciding to be an artist. This is just taking, you know, art class in high school or in K through 12. You know, it's just like this is all really important. And so I'm with you there for sure.
Well, in terms of like art departments, I mean, that's one level of education. But certainly at the elementary and high school level, there has to be much more done. Art classes, art trips, art appreciation, you know, anything to show kids that art is important and relevant and fun, you know, and something that the city needs and deserves in terms of their being residents and citizens.
And one of the things too that I was really interested in, you know, we were talking before about some of those alternative spaces. I mean, I think one of the things that I've always really liked about being in Memphis is that it's one of those places where you don't have to necessarily go bananas or lose your mind to have, you know, a front room of your apartment or something and do shows like, you know, when Lauren Kennedy had that South Fork or Joel Parsons had Beige, and then I had Material, and then Michael had front space. And so there's all these different kinds of things in there that feel real important. One of the things I noticed for sure was when, and it was a great thing that they did, when Crosstown opened the space across the way, they had this multi-purpose space, and it was like, I think $65 or something a night. And so you could do anything you wanted to in there, which was great. But I think it reduced the need or reduced the urgency for people to have their own spaces. And so I think there was kind of a time where we didn't have as many apartment galleries or alternative spaces that were going. And then, of course, the loss of second floor contemporary, you know, I mean, we have some of those places that are like that are kind of really important, you know, and, you know, like Don, you know, certainly didn't make any money off of those shows. You know, it was like a
second floor.
Yeah, it was like you know, he had all this great space, and then it had these other things that were sort of making the money.
And great shows. Just wonderful shows. Yeah,
and are there? I mean, just in terms of thinking about, I mean, that was just me kind of ranting. But in thinking about those spaces, are there any things in your brain that really sort of stand out as powerful, sort of important shows that you saw in the city?
Out of 30 years?
I know, right? more pop quiz questions from Hamlet.
Okay. Well, okay. I should have been prepared for that
Way to go, Fredric.
and made some notes and everything. Jeez.
You'll totally think about it on the way home. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. We'll switch gears. Now, another question that I have for you is, I mean, I know from, again, full disclosure, I've got pieces in yours and Leslie's collection, but your collection is pretty amazing. And so I'm curious, will you talk a little bit about the work at your house and maybe the work that you guys have collected over the years? Because that's a totally different realm to have something sort of in the personal space and decide to have it. And then that's also something I ask a lot of the artists that I interview. But I'm curious, thinking about that, what are some things that come to mind?
It's yeah, okay. That's fun. When I started reviewing art, of course, it exposed me to all these local artists and everything. And so occasionally I would, buy a watercolor or a little oil painting or something like that. A couple little pieces by J. Edkin. And well, I will tell you, were you here then? John Ryan had that storefront gallery right where Harbert runs into Bellevue, next to a laundromat. Gallery 17, it was the address, Gallery and I bought a piece by a floral watercolor by an artist named Susanna Phelps Fredric. That was the first piece I bought. I got one of John Ryan's really early little horse paintings. Just here and there, and then Leslie came to town, and she had some of her own stuff, and I was increasingly buying more. I bought some student stuff from the College of Art, that have exhibitions and things. And then it sort of started to get more serious and everything.
Like a drug habit.
Yeah, she, for my birthday one year, she bought me that big painting of yours, which is up in our living room now. When I turned 70, she bought me two of Tad's one-line drawings, the mythological ones. Yeah, beautiful. But okay, let's go back. We'll go way back. When John Ryan was with, with Alice, he had a big oil and paper thing, and of course he did these big heavy frames himself, So I bought this piece from him, $1,000, and I said I would pay him $100 a month. This is before Leslie came to town, and so he would call me like on a Friday. Now, see, I've known him since he was 12 years old.
Oh, okay.
He was doing little watercolor paintings at the zoo and stuff and selling them for, $5. So he would call me up and say, Fredric, listen, I've got a date tonight. Can I come down and get some money? I'd say, yeah, sure. Come on down. I'd go to the ATM and get him some cash and give him that. Gradually So anyway, she gave me I gave her Tim Crowder piece a few years ago, and this is embarrassing. Okay, well, let's forget that one. But anyway, I mean, it's been like that off and on, and I've been the recipient of, some nice, gifts occasionally, and I mean things like that happen. We bought those 3 pieces from you from the Rose series. There was an artist who had a show in that little gallery at AMUM, the back gallery. She was from Knoxville, and there were these square paintings on, I think, linen probably, of sort of animal heads. What was her name? I want to say Helen Farmer, but I think that's not right. And when the show was over, Leslie and I went and said, well, let's pick some out. And Leslie said, I think we need 8. I said, whoa. And the artist was there. And we picked out 8, and Leslie wrote a check and said, okay. And those were in our dining room, 4 and 4. Very striking. Very striking. Anyway, I mean, I bought a little, I bought 2 of Colin McLean's etchings from David. He was such a star at the college. Oh man, he was a star. I mean, I don't think Memphis has seen a young artist that was such a star the way Colin McLean did. And I remember he had a show, or he was in a show at Martial Arts, and there's this big painting. Man, Jesus, God, what a painting that was. And I remember Kathy Alberts was there, and Colin was there, and she just took out a checkbook. And she wrote a check for it, just like that.
It's rare that I have envy of people who have paintings in their stash, but David had this one forever in his living room of one of the ones that he did. I think it was with the water, massive one. And I tell the story of Colin all the time because he and I had a studio down there at Martial Arts at the same time, and it was before Pinckney had invested in air conditioning.
Yeah, right.
And he had this, his studio was real tiny, but it had the water faucet, like the outdoor water faucet kind of thing in the studio. And he would fill up the little kiddie tub, from Family Dollar or whatever it was. And then he would paint for a little bit and then get in there to cool off and then get back out and paint. And I'm sure that's where those paintings came from, because he was working on those real long paintings. But yeah, that was at that show at Martial Arts. That was a great show. Yeah, he's such a good painter. I love those pieces. I have a little tiny one of his. I love those. He's so good. Okay, so the question though, in terms of thinking about your place and your house, and then also thinking about your world and Leslie's world sort of overlapping and sort of connecting, I'm curious how you think about your space and how you think about the art that's in it. Is it one of those things where you guys have so much stuff that you can just change it all every August or something like that, and you change it? Or is it one of those things where this is exactly what we've got and this is good?
We tend not to change it a lot. I mean, your big painting originally was on one wall in the living room, and then we got a grand piano. And so we moved your piece because it was behind the piano. I mean, you couldn't see it. So we moved it to the adjacent wall so you can see it better. We don't do a lot of changing and things like that. We did have a big drawing by John Ryan in the dining room, and I mean, occasionally you just say, yeah, okay, we've been looking at that for 15 years. So we moved that up to the guest room. Got a nice big wall, and we put the two Tad drawings there, and then on either side there's a Tim Crowder thing and a Colin McLean thing. Makes a nice thing like that. I I tend to put up too much art, like in my office upstairs, and Leslie bought me a new rug for my office. So she comes in and she said, "You just have too much crap in here." She said, we're changing this," and it was at last Thanksgiving, where her son, my stepson, was up there, and he's a sort of a real good person about technical stuff and hanging things, and I mean, he can do anything. So they said, "Okay, you don't come in here all day long." I said, "Oh, okay." So I had like 3 photographs on this wall and another thing here and some stuff there and everything. And so they said, "Okay, you can come back in." There were 2 pieces.
Well, I do the same thing, but I do in kind of like pendulum swings.
Yeah.
Where I'll be like, okay, let's take this one wall and just completely fill it. Like everything that I've got that's small, I'm going to put it up. And then I'll, a year later, I'll say, okay, well, let's take all that stuff down and let's just put one piece up. And so I'll have those kind of pendulum swings. But I think, like for me, one of those pieces that I have that's really important to me, years ago, maybe not too long ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, the G-Pack had a show of those G's Bend quilts, and there was one that was kind of a small one. It was maybe like 3.5 by 4 or 4 by 4, something like that. And I got one of those paintings, and I think that painting has probably impacted me and sort of affected me in ways that none of the other things that I've had does. I mean, and it's a white and brown and a little tiny bit of black. But it's this amazing piece, and that piece, I think, affects me in ways that like I said, other pieces aren't. And is it that way for you guys too?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you live for years and years and years, and it's like, so we have these couches, we've had them for years. We have this piece over here, this painting, we've had that up for years. So you become acclimated to it. But then, a piece of art's not a couch. Right. And all of a sudden you think, you stand and look at it for a while and think, "Oh, yeah, I'm glad that's there. I'm glad that's there. That really helps everything." Yeah.
Okay, let me check on time. We're doing good. We've got about 15 minutes, 20 minutes left.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I was also thinking about, with you, is that connection between the poetry and the art and the food and these things. I mean, I think in the very limited amount of writing that I've done, when my brain switches on to essay mode, or it's time for me to write about something, I'll have this thing where everything begins to relate to that thing I'm writing about. It's like when you get a Toyota Corolla, you start to see all the other Toyota Corollas. And so I start to see all of these connections between things. Again, whether it's a story on the news or something else that I'm reading or another person's art or something like that. And I would imagine for you, as someone who has so many different things that you're so passionate about, I would imagine that it's kind of that it would almost be difficult to not make those connections between everything. I mean, it seems like there would be a struggle in your brain to not say, oh, okay, hang on, wait. I'm just going to talk about this one thing. I'm not going to talk about how this made me think about this movie that I saw the other day, or I'm not going to let it talk about that. And I wonder, as you've stopped writing about art, or you were saying you don't go out and see as much art anymore, Do you notice there's like a vitamin deficiency in your brain?
Um, I, I mean, obviously, I like looking at art. I would say that now art is sort of on the back burner in a way, visual art. Um, I'm more involved in reading now. Um, and and wine too, because I last year I switched my website from a hosting platform that was getting expensive to Substack, which is a subscription model. You know,
Okay.
so I'm really thinking about that every day because I don't have enough subscriptions. Everybody, you see all these things. I've been on Substacks for a year and I'm making six figures. I'm thinking, shit, man, not me. Yeah, I'm barely making one figure. Anyway, so that's on my mind a lot. And cooking, of course, because I do that every night. So in a way, I mean, I feel sort of apologetic now, just now that you bring it up. I really haven't had a commitment to looking at art in 6 or 7 years. You know?
And it almost sounds like one of those things where when someone loses one sense, the other becomes more powerful, or whatever, and it seems like that bandwidth or that space inside your brain gets filled up with the other things.
But after I stopped reviewing restaurants in 2008, I mean, we didn't go out for a long time. It was just like, phew, we don't have to go out to eat.
And that made
2
me think
nights
about
a week, even to restaurants where I don't want to go.
Well, I remember last time you were talking about how the person who was the food writer before came in
Yeah,
and just
right,
threw their stuff down, and they were like, no more creme brulee, and not having to deal with that. And so I imagine like not having to go to a restaurant and not having to do that after doing it for so long.
And so in a way, not writing about art is a reaction to looking at art all the time and to writing about art every week. I mean, that's a task. I mean, as much as I find, or certainly found, visual arts to be an incredibly important part of my life, and to occupy it like that, and to look at art all the time. Not to do that was there was a sense of a little bit of release anyway. I won't say relief, but release. On the other hand, sitting here talking to you today, and then when we did before, it makes me realize that I sort of miss all that, and I miss seeing some of the artists that I like a lot. Not just like their work, but like them too, actually.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you said that, I mean, if I remember right, the way things ended at the Commercial Appeal, like you were, it was the full-time thing, and then it was almost like I mean, I know of course there's money involved, but I know that you could have not written about art, but there was something where Fredric, I was thinking like, oh, well, Fredric really enjoys this, and for Fredric to go in and to write this review isn't just a thing that's like a part of the dumb job, but it's also one of those things where there's a pleasure, and like before when I was talking about writing and seeing all of these things sort of come together in writing an essay, like I know that writing is a task and it's difficult, but I also know that there's a kind of pleasure in working those parts of your brain out in that way, and a satisfaction that happens when you do that, you know. And so I imagine that was difficult.
Yeah. When I was laid off from the commercial appeal, you know, everything was just like that. And at first I thought, you know, I'm not going to freelance for them. Why should I freelance for them? They don't want me. And then, of course, started thinking, oh, you know, we need the money. Plus, as arts coverage in this town diminished over the years, maybe this is my ego speaking, but, you know, I felt a sense of responsibility. You know, somebody has to keep writing about art, you know, and who else is going to do it? So I started doing that again, you know, and in fact, I was very busy freelancing for the Commercial Appeal for a number of years, plus doing a column for the Daily News on restaurants and wine. So, I mean, I was really busy, all freelance, of course. And then some of the other things fell to the wayside, but I was still doing an art review every Friday. And then, you know, of course, the commercial book got sold and all this stuff and new owners, and then they were sold to, you know, Gannett and everything. And my editor said, okay, they will pay you for 3 reviews a month, not 4. I said, okay, that's fine, whatever. Still, that's some, you know. And so gradually, you know, there was a squeeze there. And then I remember in 2017, in January, they said, okay, we're not paying for any more freelance work. And that's when I went on Facebook and said, end of an era. And then my editor called me or emailed me and said, okay, they're going to pay for 2 art reviews a month. They're going to keep doing that. So I had to go back and say, oops, you know, sorry, but I actually am going to be writing, not so much, but we're still going to have some art reviews. And then in August of that year, they finally put the plug. You know, John Sparks had been writing freelance, and he was out, and me and some other people. And that was it. That was the end of that. And, you know, who has picked it up?
Yeah.
You know, not the Daily Memphian, not the Flyer.
No. And Number can only do so much.
Yeah, right, yeah. Plus they're in Nashville.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that thing that we were talking about before, you know, this idea of like, how do we make Memphis a better place? You know,
yeah.
Like whatever the phrasing there was. Thinking about that and trying to figure out, like, well, of course, we need a writer. We need somebody who writes for the paper, you know, because for sure it serves the artist, but it also builds that bridge and makes other people, civilians, know what's going on in the art community, or the possibilities of what's going on in the art community.
I mean, you cannot even get a feature story about an important exhibition unless you actually, I mean, when Bill Ellis curated that show last year about, you know, blues and folk art and stuff like that, you know, I mean, we had to contact a reporter at the Commercial Appeal personally to say, this is a great story, plus it has the Memphis connections and all this stuff. And so, you know, John Byfuss did this nice story. But that's what it takes to get even a feature story, you know, in the Commercial Appeal. And as far as the Flyer and the DM are concerned, you know, how often does it happen? Never.
Yeah. And then
so the point is that you don't just need art galleries and museums and venues, and you don't just need art education at every level. You have to have the coverage, and you have to have the critical voices that are going to encourage and educate and push things along. I mean, without that, I mean, Amom has this tattoo show right now. Man, it is fantastic. Has there been a single piece of media coverage on that show?
Right.
Nope.
Yeah, and it's about tattoos. I mean, how could who doesn't want to write about tattoos?
I mean,
it's not like it's
well,
some rarefied subject.
On the day that show opened, last Saturday, they had that Central Arts thing, and the museum was open all day long, and anybody could come in. They didn't mention that. They mentioned a tattoo convention downtown.
It's like that in that Bill Bryson book about Australia. It talks about how rarely Australia gets written about in the New York Times. It's like one of those things where it just never happens, And tapeworm was talked about more than Australia in the New York Times, during a certain year.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me that is really amazing. But in the time that we have left, one of the things I'm super curious about too with you, Fredric, is I keep up with your posts and I see the things that you're reading, and I know that you mention from time to time like how you'll reread something.
Sure.
Like one of the things that this project, this Poetry on the Porch project thing that I've been doing has really made me realize is that, oh my God, there's a lot of poetry out there. And,
Wait, what? I don't know what that is.
I started this project when I turned 50. And so like my sweet sister, every birthday gives me a book or two of poetry. And I do the same thing every year since I was 20 something years old. And I read a couple and I say, man, that was great. I'm gonna read more of those later. And I put it on this shelf. And then I never do it. And then when I turned 50, Katrina gave me a porch swing. It was during the pandemic. And so I looked at those 3 shelves that I have full of poetry books. And I recognized that I had done that thing where I said, I'm going to read that later to every book on there. And I had never really done it. And so I started with the letter A. And I had a couple of like real simple rules. Like one was that no, I don't do any anthologies or any collected poems as part of this project. I just do individual books.
Right.
Anyway, and so and there's a couple other rules. One, I read them out loud. Usually my cat is there with me. It has to be on the porch. Every once in a while I'll deviate from that. And then one of the other rules was that I wasn't going to buy any other books of poetry until I finished the project. And then I changed that to I don't buy any books of poetry in town. If I'm on vacation, it's like food doesn't have calories when you're out of town. And so anyway, I would break that rule. But one of the things that project has really made me recognize is that, holy shit, there's a lot of poetry books. And so I'm curious, as we age and we get up there, part of my brain is also like, oh my God, I have a lot of paintings to make before I'm not here anymore.
Yeah.
And I know that poetry and reading is such a huge part of your practice as a human being. And so I wonder, like, we talked a little bit about this last time with Catcher in the Rye and how, you think about it now versus how you thought about it when you were super, super young. I'm curious about you revisiting these books, because I know that there are certain books of art that I look at all the time.
Sure.
But in terms of the poetry and in terms of the reading, there's something about me that's so hungry about reading other things. Is it tricky for you to like say, okay, I'm just gonna reread this one. I want to revisit this one now.
I guess what you're asking me is how I decide.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what you get out of it.
Yeah.
And how you determine all that.
Okay. For example, there are 2 books by John Ashbery. One's called Houseboat Days, and one is Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror. I have them both in paperback. Whenever I go on a trip overseas, I take those books and I read them again. And I have read both of those books a dozen times. They never get old. they are a palimpsest of my notes and jottings and going, wow, yay, awesome, or whatever. A few years ago, I sent John Ashbery a stack of books to sign, and I sent Houseboat Days as one of them, and he sent me a letter back. He said, to send work out into the world and know that somebody is reading you with such attention and such gratitude makes it all worthwhile.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah. So I was rereading some John Ashbery earlier this month, and right now I'm doing a book by Robert Lowell, just because I hadn't read them in a long time, but earlier this year I read some books by some women poets that I hadn't read before, just because they'd been on my shelf, for 20 or 30 years or whatever. And I thought, it's about time that I read one of these books. I mean, that's one way of doing it. Another, of course, is going back to the books that really moved you and made a huge impression on you. I don't know. I mean, it's very personal, of course. By the way, I meant to bring you back those 2 books of poetry.
You keep them.
And
Or pass them to someone else.
Are you kidding?
No, no.
Oh my God!
That's my little stash. I mean, I have a stack of The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats to give to all my friends who have a kid.
Yeah.
And then I have a stack of those floaters, and then I'll sometimes change out which other ones I have. I also have a stack of Claudia Rankine's book Citizen.
Okay.
That's one of my favorites too.
Okay.
And
well, that's very generous.
The evangelical nature.
That is, you are.
It's like Gideon's Bibles, except for poetry.
I will confess that I would never do that. And there are students I had in classes 60 years ago that I'm still mad at because they never brought back the goddamn book that I lent them. In fact, I even know this guy's name.
Well, it's funny, Fredric. I have a rule that I don't loan my art books to anyone.
Yeah.
But if there's a book that I'm like, fuck, I really want it, I want that one, I'll get an extra one. And so, like, there's one that I have called My Favorite Thing is Monsters, and it's this graphic novel by this woman, Emil Ferris, and she hand draws all of the drawings, and she uses a 4-color pen, which is my favorite thing. And they're just amazing, and it's an amazing story. And so I just keep one in my office that I have, and so if I see a student, and that's the only way I'll let them do it, or I'll say, you're welcome to come to my office and sit in my chair and look at this book, but that's creepy as hell. And so I try not to do that very often because I want to keep my job.
Yeah,
I don't want to be accused of being a weirdo or a stalker.
Right,
But man, also those books. But we only have like a couple of seconds left. But I think also one of the things that I love about seeing other people's things online is it'll make me add them to the queue.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that I really both love and hate about social media, because I'll take a screen grab of it and I'll be like, okay, I got to add that. I got to add that to the queue.
You know, Corey Messler does that. I mean, everything he reads, he says, "This is what I'm reading now." This one, he reads a lot more than I do.
Right.
Because I can see what I can keep up with him, and I say, "Oh yeah, okay, I need to read that," or something he's reading again, or whatever. You know the poet Diane Seuss?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's funny too. I mean, one of the things that I have in this project is that it's curated. I mean, my sister gave it to me, and so it all passes through the filter of Heather. And so the other thing that happens is that someone will be mentioned. You know, like Nikki Finney will talk about Seamus Heaney a bunch, or Nikki Finney will talk about Nikki Giovanni or whatever, and then I'll just kind of write those names down, and then I'll be like, okay, Seamus Heaney. People mention him like all the time. I gotta see what this is about, And so like that, and then that thing that you were saying about Robert Lowell, that's another one who gets mentioned all the time, and we can talk about this on the way out. But did you ever listen to that podcast called?
I never listened to any podcasts.
Ever?
Okay,
we'll have to argue about this on the way to the elevator.
Yeah, who has time?
Fredric, thank you so much for being here with me.
Hamlet, this was great. This was really a lot of fun. Thank you.
And that was the second of 2 interviews that I recorded with Fredric Koeppel. This interview was recorded on April 12th, 2024. Please join us next week when we have another interview. Until then, thank you for listening.